Number one, summary. Segue. Herein will be developed as befits social media, the decoy of jointly fighting anti-Semitism and fighting injustice, but solely as segue to its universal solution in the cosmovision age of the Originary Sign. The Paradise App. The application of Paradise compliance is at the core of the inquiry to resolve what is at the root of the narrative of fighting anti Semitism and injustice. Think tanks and political parties usually use this term in their messaging. Litotes is the figure of speech employing double negatives or the negation of a contrary, which is used as a form of understatement. But as we'll demonstrate, it's also used to undercover, as in smoke screen to conceal an intention not wished to be revealed. Good and goods delivery. What exactly are we talking about here? It's all about delivering the good and goods by faith and culture, respectively. If the solution were in the toolbox of enlightened modernity, it would have been done a long time ago. Regarding nomenclature, herein we've chosen theism and culturalism, but just as well, this could have been religious and secular, or God and humanism, or church state. Our choice of wording is due to break with the association of ideas, all the while to conserve the entangled relationship. Monoduality and unitriadity. The long awaited good and goods of faith and culture isn't monoduality of monotheism, dual culturalism, but rather it's unitriadity of unitheism, triad culturalism. The proof that monoduality isn't the awaited good and goods of faith and culture is that the world is just as broken before as after revelation and election. If the solution doesn't solve the problem, it's because it's part of the problem, period. Causality. It's all about causality of cause and effect. To say it was close isn't good enough if the problem persists and it keeps people living in crisis and chaos. That was the whole point of revelation and election. That is, that the originary sign cosmovision was revealed to humanity from beyond and from up close for living according to our Constitution. Principle beginning. The procedure employed in this essay is that the principle of reason is at the beginning of time, all proportions kept. This established the universal principle slash beginning of knowledge UPBK of the Originary Sign Cosmovision OSC as the paradise condition. The theism position of Israel is primeval Kabbalah Alef slash Bereshit A slash in beginning of as S slash DRP. But Israel is not one of the six originary civilizations. Israel is first derivative out of Egypt and Mesopotamia, and as such, it needs authentication by one of the remaining four originary civilizations. The culturalism position of Mesoamerica is Xochitl flower P, space R, Quicketl song P slash Yolisli life S as PRD slash S. Fortunately, the creativity of Mesoamerica confirms the revelation of Israel. The one cause isn't the first one. The error of monoduality instead of unitriadity perdured on account of fusing first derivative Israel with second derivative Greece to constitute third derivative West. What was missing was the one cause of the zeroth originary sign cosmovision, whose primeval residue was found in Mesoamerica. With no loss of generality, we're putting China and India on hold, since there has been continuity and no core vestige is manifestly evident. Likewise, we'll put the Andean on pause for a similar reason. This solely leaves standing originary Mesoamerica and first derivative Israel for the refoundation of humanity moving forward. 2. Introduction. Twin foundations. The twin foundations of today's civilization of monoduality are church state, coming to represent outdated faithism and culturalism. What we're proposing in its place is unitriadity of updated faithism slash culturalism. The good and goods. The good would come from the Jews as chosen people by God, and the goods would come from the officials, elected officials, as the chosen people by, by the people as the electorate. Almost delivering the right good and goods isn't good enough. It was close but not quite. Faithism and culturalism still need delivering the right good and goods, respectively. Delivering on expectations. What does anti Semitism and injustice have in common? That is, what links fighting anti Semitism as theism with fighting injustice as culturalism? Why not simply pro Judaism and pro justice? Could it be that both share the same root cause of the no fault waiver? Our take is that fighting anti Semitism and injustice arise because neither theism nor culturalism delivered on expectations. And by extension, there is the suspicion of self serving aggrandizement on the part of these at the expense of others. In what follows, we'll try to explain the reason for the animosity, but more importantly, about how faithism and culturalism can actually deliver the good and goods once and for all. The reason that there's anti Semitism is because Judaism is at the base of faithism. Neither Christianity nor Islam get the blame because they're derived faiths and not originary faith of faiths. Same goes with injustice. The reason why there is injustice is because democracy is at the base of culturalism. Neither East nor West get the blame because they're derived faith and culture and not the originary faith of faiths nor the culture of cultures, respectively. Chosen by God and by the people. Regarding faithism and culturalism, the Jews were chosen by the powers of God, whereas the officials were chosen by the electorate of the people. Both were chosen by a higher power for a mission, the former to be light unto the nations of the world, and the latter to provide welfare to the peoples of the globe. However, the world is just as dark and the people just as alienated as before. Bringing on havoc doesn't do justice to the poor performance of outdated faithism and culturalism in our midst. The story and history. It isn't for lack of goodwill on the interested parties that things remain wanting, but on account of being unacquainted with the know-how of achieving it. But let's be clear, it is certainly a complex matter, yet it is not out of this world. Anti-Semitism goes as far back as there is a Bible, but more recently to the diaspora in 17 Common Era after the destruction of the Second Temple. Injustice goes back even more to the dawn of civilization, but more recently to the French Revolution in 1789 Common Era. Judaism and culturalism preceded paganism and autocracy, and what updates these today in turn is a pressing question. Broadly speaking, humanity is a story of faith and the history of culture. Flip sides of coin. The reason why crises and chaos prevail is on account of hanging on to outdated faithism of Israel and to outdated culturalism of Greece. In all this, bear in mind that anti-Semitism and injustice walk hand in hand. They are like flip sides of the same coin. Make no mistake, they are the religious and the secular versions of the same thing, such that explaining one serves to account for the other. Devil's advocate. But before I let you go, please allow me to play the devil's advocate. How can we be sure that it's fighting against and not fighting for anti-Semitism and injustice? Let's not give them outright the benefit of the doubt just because of their kinship with Jerusalem and Athens. It wouldn't be the first weaponization of a noble cause in religion and politics. That's for sure. Who's to gain from the status quo of fighting anti-Semitism and injustice? Not surprisingly, rabbism and parties are promoting the fight. El interés tiene pies. Weaponization. On the same thought, let's assume for the sake of argument that it is the case that the use of double negatives in speech is double talk meant to deceive. Then provide as illustrative examples fighting anti-Semitism and fighting injustice and ask to find the smokescreen. What is and who is to gain by keeping the lid tightly sealed on the outdated theism and culturalism model? That is the question. Philosophy and Zionism. Cashing in on human suffering is a formidable temptation. This is especially so given that words have malleable meanings. Take the case of philosophy. It can mean anything you want, from Greek philosophy to everyone has its own philosophy. Same with Zionism. Literally, it just means hill, referring to the city of Jerusalem, which sits on a hill. Beyond that, its meaning is up for grabs. 3. Background. The originary civilizations. The one and only solution for accessing the source is by taking the lid off the tightly sealed bottle and searching wherever it might be found and for however long it takes. We're taking a deep dive into the 6 originary civilizations of humanity for the primeval sign. What makes the civilizations originary, of which there isn't any going behind them, is the obligatory postulate of the originary sign of primeval anarchy as previous to civilization proper. In all this, there's no indefinite originary of originary of originary and so on. The thing is that the series isn't infinite, but here's the gist. There isn't a first originary, and the reason there isn't one first is because what there is the one originary. And this bottom line is where the ball comes to rest. The first isn't the one. This one originary sign is unique, of which there isn't a second. Let's shorten this unique or uniqueness characteristic of the originary sign to uni. And given its impenetrable nature, let's then identify this uni with the unknown unknown. The question now is, what else is there to work with? Well, we'll simply do the kindergarten permutation of unknown and known duos. We would then have, besides the unknown unknown, the additional knowns and unknowns, which are the unknown known, the known unknown, and the known known. Pythagorean school. If we care to give credit to our old friend of the Pythagorean school, in the words of the pre-Socratic thinker Ion of Chios, he stated, quote, "The beginning of my work is, everything is 3 and nothing more or less than these 3. The virtue of everything, of each thing is a triad, intelligence, strength, luck." Fragment DK 36b1. Another thinker of the same school of thought was Philolaus of Croton, who stated, quote, "Nature in the universe was fitted together from the non-limited and the limiting, both the universe as a whole and everything in it." Fragment DK 44b1. 6th century BCE Kindle. My guess is that this originary sign as the Pythagorean thought of the 6th century BCE early Greece comes from originary times, passing through first derivative biblical Israel of the 10th century BCE and second derivative classical Greece of the 4th century BCE. The dates are rough estimates. Recall that the Greek pre-Socratic period dating from the 6th century BCE in Ionia is coetaneous to the putting into writing of the Torah around the same period in Babylonia during the exile. And while we're at it, this date of 6th century BCE coincides roughly with the Upanishads of India and of Confucianism in China. As for Mesoamerica and Andean, during this time it was entering its classical period as well, though any further comparison would be out of phase. Chance, coincidences, or invisible hand, that's the question to lose sleep over. The uni/triad. By the look of things, today's Pythagorean theorem seems to have been known in the 4 originary civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China by way of using the 3, 4, 5 units of measurement knotted to rope. But the math version is not the whole cosmovision of the originary sign. Recall that uni, originary sign S/triad, cosmovision DRP. It must have then decayed into 3 separate parts as a monodualism of D function of S RP, with theology D, philosophy R, science P. As we can see this uni/triad deconstructed into the 3 academic disciplines named above. Roughly speaking, in Math P, it's known as the Pythagorean theorem of a squared plus b squared equals c squared. In theology, specifically in Christianity, is known as a trinity of God Father, God Son, and God Holy Ghost. In philosophy, it is known as a triad of truth, beauty, and good. But these three separate parts is not the same thing as the interlocked triad of the Originary Sign Cosmovision. Pre-Socratic schools. In any case, this Pythagorean vein seems to come from originary times of primeval anarchy, much like a time worm of sorts. And for the record, the pre-Socratic schools of thought were the Milesians, after Thales of Miletus, the Eleatics, after Parmenides and Xenophanes of Elea, the Pythagoreans, after Pythagoras of Samos, plus the secret sect of the Tetractis, after Pythagoras of Samos, of course. Chapter 4, Basics, Circle and Right Triangle. Essentially, the uni/triad can be conveyed graphically by a right triangle inside a circle, with the right triangle as triad DRP and the circle as the uni-S. By way of example, the uni-whole as in sub, stands, or in under, standing, with the triad parts as in sub, stands, or in under, standing. Another pictorial is the never-failing coin, with uni, coin S, being, / becoming, triad parts DRP, with tails D, rim R, heads P. In the above, we have under D, connecting R, standing P. Lo que se ve no se pregunta. All the above illustrative examples are segue to the application of the updated Temple Model S as made up of Sanctuary D, Commons R, Shop P. The unitriad is the OSC, which is later quantized for practical measuring purposes in the Pythagorean theorem in math in the well-known equality a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The Paradise acronym. To cut to the chase, primeval Kabbalah is expressed by the acronym. This simply stands for Uni S/Triad DRP, Sought Secret S, Faith / Culture, Manifest DRP, Discover Dirash R, D, Remes Research R, Peshat Plain P. Thus, as above mentioned, we identify unknown with Uni, now with S, and the rest as follows for a complete picture. Uni S/Triad DRP as unknown S/ unknown D, known and unknown R, and known P. Procedure. But I'm already getting ahead of myself by posting conclusions and arguments, and I had already convened for the sake of economy to state the conclusions and leave for the other video the larger argument. Otherwise, this is going to get too long and won't serve to whet the appetite, but rather to satiate it entirely instead. That said, let's state the conclusion and leave the clarifications for later. Living Guide. What makes it the cosmovision of the Originary Sign is leading one's lives under the Paradise compliance condition. Uni/triadity is the cosmovision of the Originary Sign. Rhetorically, it's, quote, the one whole is and becomes triad parts, unquote. And in formulation, as creator S of creator/creature of creation DRP, in D rim R of P, or spiritual D mental R physical P. Primeval Israel. This can also be formulated to facilitate understanding as Uni S/Triad DRP with discovered D, reflect R, plain P. That said, now things make perfect sense. Faithism is simply taking the one letter of the Hebrew alphabet Alef, then /, then the first word Genesis 1:1a of the Torah of Bereshit in beginning of. In a nutshell, we now have primeval Kabbalah of Israel as Alef/Bereshit, a/ in beginning of Genesis 1:1a/Alef. As first derivative Israel, this would make it the secondary residue of the Originary Sign. Primeval Mesoamerica. I'll simply state here that it's what it is in Originary Civilization of Mesoamerica, that the recurring key words is the diphrasism of Xochitl flower song, which was mistakenly confused by academics with a metaphor or at best with metaphysics. This I later expanded as Xochitl slash Yolisli, flower song slash life, and properly identified it as the primary residue of the originary sign. Backward leap forward. Now comes the backward leap forward. Something besides the inside revelation story, but from the outside, is needed to certify the authenticity of Israel. Stories of the ideal world is not the same as history from the real one. The first derivative Israel is characterized by its secondary residue Alef slash Bereshit, A in beginning of. Is utilized to identify the primary residue represented by Xochitl, slash Yolisli in Mesoamerica originary. What is now clearly evident is that the right to left S slash DRP of Israel's theism contrasts with the left to right PRD slash S of Mesoamerica's culturalism. This is so on account of making the following unfoldments: Alef S slash B D Resh R E P A S slash in D beginning R of P with a slash as S holy slash profane DRP as S DRP. Likewise, Xochitl P space R P Xochitl P space R R D Yolisli S as PRDS. That is, secondary residue Israel helps identify Mesoamerica as primary residue of the Originary Sign Cosmovision, and the favor is returned by primary residue Mesoamerica certifying the authenticity of Israel as secondary residue of the OSC. Thus, Israel is clearly 11a Alef slash Alef in the Torah teaching tradition. End of the heuristic proof. Chapter 5. Argument. Watermark. What is a watermark of faith and culturalism? What underlies our brokenness? What underlies our brokenness is the belief that the cradle of the West is synonymous with the cradle of cradles of the world. The trick to have us fooled is by way of the no-fault waiver of the double negative to seemingly disclose the substantive, when in fact it clouds the point in question. Litotes. That is, this tongue trick figure of speech, otherwise known as litotes, is instrumented by way of a double negative account, which effectively makes it risk-free. By using the double negative in each case of anti-Semitism and injustice, it avoids having to clearly state up front what is their defining good and goods that they are supposed to deliver, respectively. Their mission is left inconclusive, yet assume that one already knows it for certain, given that it was employed with such familiarity, which is not the case. So, they get away without affirming what is the case with the assumed deliverances, covering up Semitism and justice by way of fighting anti-Semitism and injustice as they stand today have a message which doesn't hold water. Revelation and election. They're the twin mirages of monotheism of obedience to God and dual culturalism of democracy as people rule. This is the problem. If the mission of Semitism as Judaism is monotheism and of justice as the West is democracy, then why is the world just as broken before as after such deliveries of revelation and election? As presented, they're impregnable of guilt, all the while benefiting from presumption of innocence. It begs the question of why anti-Semitism and injustice still linger. No-fault waiver. The two big smokescreen pillars are played out by double negative accounts or storylines. It's a cover-up to hide the identity of the culprits behind the crisis and chaos in our midst, respectively. Fighting anti-Semitism, insofar as it references the Creator, makes it essentially out of reach. Fighting injustice, insofar as it references creation, makes it essentially out of reach too. That said, in practice, this trick comes across by way of the no-fault waiver of fighting anti-Semitism and of fighting injustice. Monoduality. The watermark of outdated theism and culturalism is monoduality. That is, Outdated Israel's theism is monotheism, and outdated Greece's culturalism is duoculturalism. The Originary Sign Cosmovision appears as a watermark throughout the Torah. It's specifically evident in the Mishnah tabernacle starting in Exodus chapter 25, but it appears invisible, passing unnoticed if one is focused on the surface text. There's the foreground and background watermark of the paradise principle formula, much like the rules of grammar as watermarks in textual construction of subject, verb, object, or adjective if using the to be verb. Updating. The problem with Ravism is that it's the watermark of tradition for better and worse. It's what keeps it being and avoiding becoming. It's the mainstream obstacle of change. Case in point is taking sanctuary synonymous with synagogue. Likewise, Ravism is to Judaism as Judaism is to Israel, as Israel is to monotheism, hence having monoduality instead of unitriadity is to the Torah as it should be. It's just a question of updating the outdated. Reform means ongoing reforming, not past reform as a one-off reform. Goose and gander. Fighting anti-Semitism means fighting for Semitism, understood as Judaism. But what could Judaism as bellicose outcome possibly mean? Fighting injustice means upholding justice. But what could justice as conflict outcome mean? One thing is what's good and goods for Jews and people, and quite another is what good and goods for Ravism and bureaucracy. Two-sided coin. Fighting anti-Semitism and fighting injustice are flip sides of the same coin. Double negatives as vacuous understatement is vicious undercover. The cradle of the West is Israel, Greece, but the West isn't the world. That is, happening before the cradle of the West is the cradle of cradles of the world of the 6 originary civilizations. Shell game. Fighting anti-Semitism and injustice is fighting anti-Semitism and fighting injustice. And now that we're talking about this, in all fairness, let's talk about the cradle of cradles. That is, take a deep dive into the originary 6 civilizations. By employing the ploy of the double negatives figure of speech of fighting anti-Semitism and fighting injustice, it leaves undefined what Semitism and justice are. It avoids definitions. It begs the question of what Semitism and justice are by staging the hand trick of the shell game. Outdated foundations. How many ways can it be said? The problem with our times is that it's founded on the undefined unknowns of faithism and culturalism. If you're not part of the solution, it could be because you're part of the problem. They're both convinced of delivering the good and goods, but the fact on the ground says otherwise. But if we keep the pressure on, we see clearly the watermark of outdated faithism and culturalism as monotheism and duoculturalism. Dumping. By having mono impenetrable and leaving culturalism aside, it's monoduality. As mono and thus mono and non-mono, it's then monoduality. We're fooled into believing that outdated faithism and culturalism are delivering the good and goods, when in fact they're unloading, or should we say dumping on us, the bad and bads instead. Wonder no more why the world is broken and granulating the more one tries in vain to integrate it. Six, Exemplar, the secret. Life is a mystery, and living is a potluck of chance coincidences and the invisible hand at work. Life is spent creatively, not in futile pursuit of happiness, but in fruitful thinking. The Joseph story. GD has its invisible hand in everything. How so is the question. Joseph was earmarked to be his father's heir, especially on account of the falling out of grace of the eldest son after his having jumped his father's bed. As a spoiled brat, he would have made a despotic ruler of the family. So Joseph had to undergo the curative process of near-death experience enslavement, and incarceration. This prepared him for the position of vizier to the Pharaoh during the times of famine, to thus save the children of Israel by bringing them to Goshen on the Nile River Delta. This set the stage for the Exodus. The willing heart. Why did pogroms occur and why are there poor people? Everything happened because GD commanded it in its infinite wisdom, justice, and mercy, just like in the cases of the two temples of Jerusalem and the two world wars. What does this mean? Three options are explained appear in Exodus 7 to 12. The GD's will is slash Pharaoh's heart DRP. GD hardened Pharaoh's heart D. Pharaoh's heart hardened or Pharaoh hardened his own heart P. Our charge is disentangling the knot and taking home the lesson learned. The will and the invisible hand. Adam Smith coined the phrase of the invisible hand moving things as in private vices make social virtues. No hay mal que por bien no venga, que nadie sabe para quién trabaja. Immanuel Kant contributed the autonomy of the will or free will. Seven, the iOrange triad. The starting point of any and every discussion on humanity must be from its very nature. And this is uni slash triadity, as in the one person S is slash becomes triad part DRP, spiritual D, mental R, physical P. We're uni-triadic beings, not mono-dualist bots, or else uni-triadity, not mono-duality. Triad means three parts which are inseparable, like the two sides and hypotenuse of a right triangle. The two sides and hypotenuse constitute the right triangle. There is no right triangle without any of its constituent parts missing. This kind of reminds me of the 3-in-1 lubricant oil, which came originally in a metallic rectangular container with a red valve dispenser. Updated and outdated. The expectation continues on the good and goods of the deliveries of deliverance from crisis and chaos on the part of the chosen Jews of theism and the e-officials of culturalism. The timeline of theism slash culturalism is yesterday's outdated monotheism, duoculturalism, and tomorrow's updated theism slash triad culturalism. Church-state separation. During the age of intolerance of the 16th century, the church-state separation was instituted as a practical measure to avoid the ongoing religious warring among European nations. The agreement guaranteeing freedom of religion is enshrined in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. The downside of short-term gains are long-term losses. As a temporary procedural fix, it was fine, but with time it seemed to have taken a life of its own and transitioned in our midst from a remedy to a malady. The challenge is how to take the gap out of church-state separation, or textually the hyphen or dash, without generating havoc instead of a liberating deliverance. It may have been a good halfway measure, but nothing beyond that. Solely going all the way to the deep source will fix the difficulty permanently. Christian nationalism. Today, Christian nationalism has done away with the stopgap of church-state separation. The problem is that what's being delivered now are bad and bads instead of good and goods. Removing the partition between church-state produces a short circuit. It is a regression to religious intolerance in contemporary modality of polarization. Church-state union. The church-state union has led to polarization, que no hay mal que por bien no venga. By removing church-state separation, Christian nationalism has actually served to open the tightly sealed lid on questioning the soundness of separation in the first place. It was originally intended to fix a wrong, but not to inherently redefine humanity. A change is long overdue to that temporary fix which brought about unwanted, calamitous consequences. What peace of mind was won came at the price of accepting the unsound in which an effect took the place of the cause. Nonsense and soundness. Removing the division in church-state separation keeps making horse sense all the while being unsound. However, Christian nationalism has a point in that we're whole oranges, not halved oranges, so that nobody misses it. We're iOranges, not sliced ones. I'm for removing the dash in favor of the forward slash, but understood as going from fractal monoduality of enlightened modernity to holistic uni-triadity of the Originary Sign Cosmovision. That is, replacing the dash in church state with a forward slash in theism slash culturalism means replacing monoduality with uni-triadity. Interfaith and interculture. Outside Christian nationalism of the political right wing, interfaith has meaning just as much as intercultural. Interfaith and intercultural people seem to harbor center and left wing, though they rarely meet. Example would suffice to mention Interfaith Action of Central Texas, IACT, and Central Texas Interfaith, TCI, respectively. Very similarly sounding names, yet widely apart. For central approaches, we could mention Braver Angels, BA, which stress civility in encounters between red and blues, but it seems to attract people who were already civil before they joined, much like preaching to the choir. Democratic socialism. The left wing has come up with democratic socialism, a sort of social democracy under an inverted name. It's sort of temporary fix to corporate democracy by rule of plutocracy and oligarchy. But essentially, insofar as communist dictatorship is antithetical to capitalist democracy, it needs softening with democratic modifier added to socialism. Combining capitalism and communism sounds like a members and non-members only mock exclusive club. Issues and cosmovision approaches. The establishment is kept in place by pins and needles. Issues are injustices committed with need of deliverance. The epoch of 16th century church-state separation palliative has come to haunt us. Church-state separation is unsound as is, but in practice makes perfect sense, telling by the peaceful effects brought to war-torn countries over religious hegemony. Today, in the 21st century, we need to come up with a better solution by way of a deeper understanding of things. The issues approach is quick, short-sighted, and of short duration. By contrast, the cosmovision approach is timeless, though requires some thought. 8. Pros and cons. Optimal. Everything has pros and cons. The following should serve as guide to arrive at the optimal solution. The idea is to look down the timeline and measure the short-term benefits and the unwanted long-term consequences later on. Our claim is that the best overall option is that solution which complies with the paradise condition. Updating. That is, the optimal solution to any and every difficulty is the one which is paradise compliant, but it must be applied continuously at each successive stage of the process insofar as it can be partitioned down the space and time line. Optimization is dynamic, starting with the initial point and onwards up to the present and beyond for projection. 9. Double positives. Litotes, double negatives trick. Fighting anti-Semitism translates as Semitism, and fighting injustice translates as justice. What is the meaning of these twin double negatives in place of a single positive affirmation? These are the two-in-one questions which need to be avoided at all costs. Two birds with one stone. It resolves both as flip sides of the same coin. Here, both Semitism as Judaism and justice as democracy are the tips of the iceberg, which means that underneath in general reside the church state. What is this double talk of double negatives concealing? Aux exis, Internet. The overarching term for arranging words in an order of increasing force or importance, essentially acting as an emphatic double positive, is auxexis, Greek for growth or increase. Hyperbole is often considered a specific type of auxexis, where an exaggeration is used to amplify the positive or negative significance of something. Climax is another term related often used interchangeably with auxexes to describe this ascending order. Justice/justice. The exposure of the cover-up of the double negatives of monoduality can be found in the double positives of unitriadity in Deuteronomy 16:20, with justice/justice pursue sedek tirdov. Herein, taken from my latest books, will provide a soft and quick takeaway for the viewing audience. Justice/justice of double positives refers to pursuing the originary sign cosmovision, whereas fighting injustice of the double negatives is the cover-up of social justice, referring to pursuing issues. Semitism/Semitism. Solely said in passing due to time concerns, but Judaism/Judaism of unitriadity comes across as updated theism/culturalism, more specifically as Israel's theism/Mesoamerica's culturalism. Inconclusive. Renaissance. To vitally conserve civilization moving forward, one has to reform it, renew it, and reconstruct it on an ongoing basis. What's needed is the updated theism/culturalism model for a resurgence of assembly. Recapitulating, monoduality of fighting anti-Semitism and fighting injustice of monotheism/duoculturalism is the bads of our broken world. Is the enlightened ploy used to avoid resolution. By contrast, the originary sign cosmovision is the unitriadity of unitheism/triad culturalism. This primeval solution of the originary sign cosmovision would put an end to fighting anti-Semitism and injustice as expressed by the paradise compliance condition. Its application is the proof of the pudding. In a nutshell, as things turned out, it now takes Jews and e-officials to deliver the good and goods. Going with the flow is the easy and wrong way. The hard and right way is going upstream to the springs. That is, Israel's Alef/Bereshit, A in beginning of, / Mesoamerica's Xochitl/Cuicitl / Yolisli, flower song / life. In other words, the good and goods is unitriadity as unitheism/triad culturalism. Deliverance. Mesoamerican triad culturalism / Israeli theism. From faithism, delivering the good is the updated synagogue model. From culturalism, delivering the goods is the updated 53I plus state model. Overall, it's unitheism/triad culturalism. Faith-culture separation. Church-state separation is a smart idea based on the cradle of the West of Enlightenment, but not so as based on the cradle of cradles of the world of cosmovision. The problem is that the latter provides the foundation for the former, that is, cosmovision trumps enlightenment. Cosmovision and taking sides. Outdated faith and culture is in our midst, in our hearts, and takes the form of convincing ourselves that taking sides on issues is the way to go, much like sports gambling on TV. It likewise begs the question of why things are ever changing only to remain unchanged. I have yet to hear of a solution which goes beyond echoes of past tried and failed efforts. Yet we hang on to the issues and polarization approach and disdain any unifying theory beyond the legal framework of the Constitution. The cry is that if only the laws were followed, things would be fine. Don't take sides and instead endorse cosmovision. Eponyms. Bibi and Donnie come to personify the times of faith and culture of East and West, respectively. People get the clerics and the e-officials they deserve. That's all, folks. Homework. The cherry on the cake. What's left pending after the party? Washing the dishes and cleaning up the mess. And what's the proof of the pudding if not in the eating? That is, applying the paradise compliance condition to the relic Enlightenment period failed solutions to resolve the world's problems. In other words, replacing outdated monoduality with updated unitriadity. Middle East opportunity lost. The Middle East is the microcosm of the world, not just the Israel-Palestine conflict. Solely the Cosmovision app can achieve peace in the Middle East. And if it can make it there, it can make it anywhere. On the ground, this means starting the cause/movement of the Cosmovision age of the Originary Sign. Capitalism and socialism. What does the Bible say about capitalism and socialism? Nothing explicitly. Rephrasing the question, what does theism/culturalism say about political economic systems? I'll soon reply by unpacking the 53I plus state in a video based on my latest book. The defraud feeling. There's the S's of sex and success, and there's the C's of care and creativity. How common is the feeling of emptiness after having lived the S's and neglected the C's? King Solomon, alias Kohelet, used to say that happiness is futile, that solely creative living is fruitful. Was he advocating for the C's after having tried himself the S's? The wishy-washy. There are always the well-intentioned who want to resolve things by treading the middle road. The problem is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There is no middle tool between a screwdriver and a hammer, any more than between the positive and the negative numbers other than the zero. That is, the null set is not something you can count on. This is precisely the meaning behind the double negatives which we've uncovered. On fighting, luchar. Fighting in English is equivocal in that it can mean fighting for or fighting against. In Spanish, by contrast, it's univocal in that fighting, luchar, is explicitly fighting for, luchar por, or fighting against, luchar contra. Back on point, which is fighting anti-Semitism and injustice. Fighting for anti-Semitism and for injustice, against anti-Semitism and against injustice, for anti-Semitism and against injustice, or against anti-Semitism and for injustice. Built-in ambiguity sure leaves room for pause. YouTube handle. Please view my YouTube videos at my handle at Rick Turrios Bonilla. The videos Universal Principles / Beginning of Knowledge, the updated faith culture model for a resurgence of assembly, the website paradiseism.com, and my latest book, the Alef Bereshit Xochitl Paradise Principle, at Amazon. All the best to you. Thank you.